Hey guys, the Kamsh here. Today we're going to be talking about the 5 new BlackRock spoilers that we have. Before we do that, a lot of people in the comments last couple videos recommended I get a stand-up mounted mic for the desk. And I did do that, so hopefully it sounds better. Let me know how that's working for you in the comments, or if you have any questions about the cards, so on and so forth. I'll try to respond to those. So let me know about that as well. So our first card we're going to be talking about is Dragon Egg. This card's pretty interesting from a design standpoint. They haven't really had one drops with this sort of effect before. It is neutral too, so that's pretty cool. So let's talk about some of the decks it could fit in. Potentially in Zoo, you can buff it with things like Abusive Sergeant, Defender of Argus, Dark Iron Dwarf, Direwolf Alpha. That is a little bit of work for not that much payoff in the 2-1. Mostly probably with it's better with Direwolf Alpha since that's a reusable effect, whereas Dark Iron Dwarf, Defender, and Abusive Sergeant are only one time. So if you use it on this, you won't get to use it on things like Nerubian Egg. And a lot of times Nerubian Egg is probably going to be better than the card in Zoo. This does provide a little bit of protection against damage-based AoE, but not against things like Brawl or Twisting Nether, where this will just won't leave anything behind. This card could be used in Druid because they can buff it on turn 2, but standalone in Druid without buffs, this card is awful. So it's probably not really what Druid wants to be doing, since Druid wants to ramp in the early turns and then play bigger threats later on. So that leaves us with the last class that might want this card, Priest. Priest can play this on turn 1 and then coin Velen's Chosen on turn 2, make a 2/6 that they can heal up that'll make a lot of whelps. And that's a pretty strong effect. On its own, Velen's Chosen is fine in the Priest deck, and even if you draw this without Velen's Chosen, you can always Auctionize Circle and get a 2/1 out of it. And then you're paying 1 mana for a delayed 2/1, which isn't awful. This card is pretty susceptible to silences in that deck, but I do think this card has some constructed potential, maybe in Priest, but in other decks, Nerubian Egg is probably better. In Arena, this card probably isn't worth the effort, just because it takes a lot of work to activate it and then get the 2/1, or potentially multiple 2/1s. Like Nerubian Egg isn't fantastic in Arena, and it's probably better than this card in Arena. And you still don't see people going to those ends to get it to work. So moving on, we have Dragonkin Sorcerer. So the initial stats of a 3/5 are fine, although it is neutral. Many classes like Rogue or other classes that lack buffs probably won't want this card due to its lack of synergy. Druid probably doesn't want to play a bunch of buffs along with this. They'd probably rather play a Shredder or a Yeti. But Priest might want this card. Again, this and the Egg are both probably going to be at its best in Priest, just because you want to be targeting them both with spells. Power Word Shield makes this a 4/8 and draws you a card. Then Velen's Chosen makes this a 6/10 with +1 spell damage. So both of those are pretty strong, because on turn 5 you'll have a pretty big beater usually. This could potentially be good in that sort of Priest deck, but it is kind of weak to silences, and the conventional Priest decks right now are kind of tight on room because they're trying to fit in a lot of things. We've seen a lot of Priest decks drop Shadow Madness, which is a very good card, so another 4-drop might be kind of hard to fit in. We might see sort of an aggressive Priest deck develop with 2 copies of Velen's Chosen, maybe the Egg and this, and just trying to overwhelm your opponent early game with big creatures that you can heal up to stop them from dying. This is a dragon, so it does work with things like holding dragons or any potential dragon buffing cards that may be spoiled. This is a good play after Blackwing Technician, because on turn 3 you get the Blackwing Tech, and you're holding a 4-mana dragon that you can drop right after it. So I think this card could be potentially constructed playable, but it'll probably have to go into some sort of new archetype, because in existing decks it's not significantly better than any of the other 4-drops. So in Arena, this is a 3/5 with potential upside. Obviously, probably value it a little bit higher in decks like Priest, or if you have a lot of buffs as a Druid or something. But as far as a 4-mana 3/5 goes, it's usually fine in Arena. So possibly constructed playable, Arena playable, decent card. Moving on, we have Core Rager, the Hunter class card, or one of the Hunter class cards. And I think this card is pretty bad. So in mid-range Hunter, you'll have cards in your hand like Savannah Highmane or Dr. Boom. So this will usually be a 4-mana 4/4, unless you play it really, really late. At that point, you've either won or lost the game, and you might as well just have a War Golem since you're playing it late enough where the casting cost is the same if this is your only card in your hand. In Phase Hunter, you want to conserve cards like Hunter's Mark, Owl, Kill Command. You want to keep them in your hand. You don't want to dump them onto the board without purpose. So this is pretty bad in Phase Hunter as well. So a lot of the time, this will be a 4-mana 4/4. Additionally, in Face Hunter, if you do somehow manage to empty your hand and activate this, not only is your hand empty, so if your opponent's at a high enough life total where you can't steady shot them down, you're probably going to lose the game. This becomes your only BGH target, so if your opponent's been saving that BGH all game without anything good to play it on, now they have Core Rager. If you build a deck around this card with a bunch of like 1-drops to empty your hand as fast as possible, that's pretty bad as well, because once this gets killed or silenced, the rest of your draws will be 1-drops, which is pretty bad. So this card is either actively bad or encourages bad deck building. And it's not a great top deck either, just in any Hunter deck, because at that point, if you're top decking late in the game, you have enough mana to play War Golem anyway. So basically this is a War Golem. In Arena, it's okay as a 4/4 beast, can turn into a War Golem if top decked, but it's not great. It's just an average card. It's usually going to be a 4-mana 4/4, and trying to make it a 7/7 is usually going to result in either bad play decisions or bad deck making choices. So there's still a lot of people complaining about this card, and that proves that people will complain about any Hunter card spoiled ever. Feign Death and Gazrilla are super OP, I swear. Moving on, we have Imp Gang Boss. This card's pretty cool. It's a 3-mana 2/4 with a good effect, which seems like where Blizzard wants to have these cards. See, we have like Grove Tender, Illuminator, and Flame Waker, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but they're all 2/4s with a beneficial effect. So it looks like in the future, Blizzard wants to keep 3-mana 2/4s with a beneficial effect at those stats and mana cost. So this card is pretty good. It's a demon that makes more demons, and Demon Lock doesn't have a good 3-drop right now. The only 3-drop most lists play is BGH, which you usually don't play on turn 3 anyway, because you want to save it to kill something big. So this fills the curve quite nicely. It's also a solid value minion. If you go like turn 2 Egg, turn 3 Imp Gang Boss, then turn 4 you play Defender of Argus, you have a very strong board that's very protected against any kind of AoE. Your opponent probably won't want to silence this just because it still says a 2/4, and that's kind of a waste of a silence. So this could also potentially see play in a higher curve zoo deck. Provides more stats than Harvest Golem potentially. It is kind of weak to Brawl, but it's strong against damage-based AoE. So I think this is a pretty solid card. It's pretty good in Arena as well, because it'll usually trade up with some of the worst minions your opponent plays and then make some imps. So I think this card has pretty good potential in both Constructed and Arena. So finally, our last spoiler, we have Flame Waker. So this card is very good. I think it's the best card spoiled so far. 2 damage per spell is a very significant amount. It's important to remember that Coin is a spell. This could potentially get played in Mech Mage because of spare parts. You would have to cut a lot of non-mech cards for it, because mechs are going to be your source of spare parts. You're probably going to want to run 2 Mechanical Yetis along with this card. You're going to want to run lots of the early mechs, so your Tinker Towns are enabled. So you're going to have to cut maybe like Water Elementals or Lothebs, but I think it might be worth it, because this card is very strong with spare parts. It is a little bit awkward, because a lot of times you want to save like the Stealth spare part or some of the other ones for Archmage Antonidas, and this encourages you to play them all as fast as you can. But this card could be good in that deck. I think this card is really good in the Tempo Mage deck with like Portals, Worms, etc. And I think this card will be the strongest in its own dedicated deck. So like sort of the dream with this card, you go turn 1 Mana Worm, turn 2 Sorcerer's Apprentice. Turn 3 you play this, you coin Unstable Portal, you get a Cobbled Geomancer, you play it, and then you Arcane Missiles twice, and you deal a total of 16 random damage, and then bash with a 5/3 Mana Worm and a 2/2 for a total of 23 damage on turn 3. So it's sort of like the best case scenario, but even in some of the worst scenarios, this card gets a lot of value. It's sort of reminiscent of Goblin Blast Mage, which is a really good card. So this encourages you to play some spells in your deck, but Mage already has a lot of good spells along with spare parts. So this is definitely a very strong constructed card. I think it's a fine pick in Arena, especially if you pick up a lot of spells or spare part givers. 3-mana 2/4 is never going to be horrific. So this card is quite good. Alright guys, let me know if you have any feedback. Thank you for watching, and enjoy.